there, pressing a button. Fantastic. Right, Rachel, Suzanne, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jenny. I'm rarely called lovely or a lady, so that's very nice. Thank you very much. I think Rachel and I are delighted to present or host this final session, and thanks to everyone who's hanging on with their last cup of tea for this last online bit of the day. I'm Suzanne. I'm Head of Development Scotland for Cycling UK. You can probably tell from the name that we're a cycling organisation. That's what we're about. Although actually, as you'll find out, we do some walking and wheeling as well. I'll let Rachel introduce herself in a moment. One of the people I'd like to introduce to you is Ian. I came across Ian during one of the Cycling UK projects that we've been running, and I thought he would be a great panellist for today's session. I think inclusion and accessibility has been mentioned throughout the day, but this is really what we're going to be focusing on. So Ian, could you just tell us a bit about you and how you came to be invited here to this session?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Oh, yes.
I've got difficulty seeing myself sometimes. In answer to your question, I don't honestly 100% know because I'm the only person on any of the panels without letters after my name. I have letters after my name from a previous dispensation, but I've been retired with MS since 2015. So I think the reason that I've been asked to be on this panel is to give you my perspective as a disabled person on access to transport in the Highlands and Islands, because I have people on the islands as well. But also because I've been the beneficiary of a charity in Inverness called Wheelness, who are associated with your charity, Suzanne, and as I understand it, and it's totally revolutionized my life in terms of getting out and about. So in terms of perception, one day the four walls were closing in, the next day my horizons are expanding. So in other words, there's a narrative back in my life. And I think narrative is a very important word, a very key word with me, but pertaining to this whole issue. I'm very aware of having a different narrative to everyone else here. And speaking something of a different language. But I think if I keep going back to the word narrative and how it's come back into my life and how in terms of connectivity, in terms of the fluidity of my personal story, in terms of relationships, the narrative has come back. And I think narrative is a key word as well when it comes to making journeys, micro journeys or whatever. I think, you know, we live in a society that suffers from a sort of collective neurosis, particularly after lockdown, but also from before then, the effects of social media on young people, etc. I call it the theory of the fractured narrative. You know, operating on 10 different screens at the same time or different platforms, but none of them are connected. We're, you know, the illusion of connectivity, but we're not actually genuinely connecting with other people. And this is what travel enables us to genuinely connect with other people. That's part of the reason that I feel that narrative has come back into my life as a result of this charity. I've got lots more I could say, probably too much and very little of it relevant to you, but thanks very much indeed. I better stop now.
Thanks, Ian. We've got plenty of questions for you, so I'm going to hand over to Rachel now to introduce our other two panellists.
Brilliant. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you, Ian, as well. Hi, folks. I'm Rachael Murphy. I'm Director for Scotland with Como UK. You might realise, much as Ian has said, that the letters after my name have changed. I was until the end of August the Director of Scotland with the Community Transport Association. But I think these things link really nicely together when we're talking particularly about rural transport. Well, let's face it, we need every good idea and every good mode we can get our hands on. I will just introduce our other two panellists. It's really exciting to have them joining us today. because I think we need to look at these issues, particularly for disabled travellers, from every perspective, and they're going to really inform our conversation today. So firstly, we have Linda Bamford, who, amongst her many hats, and my God, she must have a serious wardrobe for all these hats. Linda is convener of the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland. And as well, we're joined by Jack, who's head of UK, Jack Holland, apologies, who's head of UK Business Development for Padam Mobility, which is a DRT platform. Linda and Jack, do you want to just say hi and kind of introduce how you're involved in this conversation? I'm going to go with whoever unmutes fastest. Linda, it was you. Go for it. It was you. It was you. Go for it.
It's normally me. I'll assume everybody can hear me, because one thing I don't normally get normally get told for is that my voice isn't loud enough. It's normally, can you quieten it down a bit? Thanks very much for the introduction, Rachel. She's right, I do have a couple of hats. Today my invite came as the convener for the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland. Max's overarching remit is to give advice to Scottish ministers on the travel needs of disabled people, and to do that we obviously have to engage with disabled people at grassroots and through other stakeholder organisations. The other thing that brings me to this agenda is I'm a wheelchair user, which was quite sudden for me about 8 years ago when I got a spinal cord injury. Through that, Spinal Injury Scotland helped me a lot in my rehabilitation. And I joined their board for a while as chair, and I'm still an ambassador with them, and obviously I'm a convener with Disability Equality Scotland. Their overarching purpose is to improve access and inclusion for disabled people in Scotland. My final hat for today is the Poverty and Inequality Commission for Scotland, which is another public body that advises ministers. I was quite interested to hear the previous conversations round about transport poverty. It's certainly something we were actually just discussing in our board meeting today. So although there's about 3 or 4 hats there, they all do interlink. But a bit like Ian, one of the things that has brought me here is that I'm passionate that active travel and opportunities to engage with active travel doesn't exclude disabled people. I'm not as active as I used to be, but a lot of that is because of barriers I'm coming up against, and I do try to overcome them. As I said, my spinal cord injury was quite sudden, and before that I did a lot of cycling, was always out walks and whatever else, and going from not being disabled to being disabled and finding things about the infrastructure and equipment that I needed that I didn't have that was too costly, it's just a nightmare to navigate. So I'm really quite passionate that if I can use my voice to make improvements and make sure that disabled people aren't left behind when we look to active travel and accessible travel, that's what's brought me here today.
Jack, jump in. Oh, I can't hear you. No, I still can't hear you. No, this is not. No, this is not where. Oh, right.
Our first technical glitch in 2 online gatherings.
I'm cursed.
My goodness me, Jack. No pressure.
No, Jack, no. Do you want to leave and jump back in? And if we just go into our questions, then when you give your response, no, he's gone. Right. I'll shut up, Suzanne. Back to
That's
you.
okay. I'll lead off with our first question, really. I think people are understanding a bit more these days about intersectionality, about how different inequalities can combine to really compound each other and make everything worse. So I suppose that's our sort of first question is what are the barriers really to active and sustainable travel, not just as a disabled person, but as a disabled person living in a rural area? Ian, can we start with you and just find out a bit about what extra barriers you feel they are, and perhaps if there's been some solutions?
It's very curious that actually all of the problems that have been mentioned this afternoon, I think, certainly all the problems that hit me are amplified if you're disabled, but they're also amplified if you happen to live in a rural location, which is ironic because actually, I live in Drumnadrochit, which is 14 miles from Inverness. Beautiful, beautiful vista, Loch Ness on the doorstep. A beautiful place to be incapacitated, I used to say, if I have to be. A beautiful place to be isolated, that's more recent. And so I'm not complaining in either of those two regards, but there is next to no mobility out with the sort of bucolic, well, sorry, the accessing the countryside. I can't get to Inverness on my trike. I think most people are aware of that stretch of road. It's quite notorious. And even somebody earlier, Carolyn, who's part of the Glenurquhart hub for transport, recently set up. She leases e-bikes to tourists in the summer, and they really do face quite a lot of difficulties even on the local roads. So I think there's a sort of inversely proportional relationship here. The more isolated you get, the more your scenery engenders the feeling of freedom and horizons expanding and all of that. The more difficult it is for you to access anywhere by transport. I want to touch on two things, if it's possible. The first thing is access to public transport, and I've been dependent on the local bus service for the last 5 years, and I think the west, anything west of Inverness, is kind of the land time forgot in some ways, which does buy into that narrative. That's, you know, that sort of romanticized view of living in the outback, but there are real difficulties at accessing public transport from a disabled person's point of view. So you access a bus which may or may not have disabled facilities. Fortunately, I get about with sticks, so I don't need a wheelchair, but it is touch and go whether or not there is a wheelchair space available. Not only that, but the size of bus varies in the extreme. I quite often find myself being the only passenger, so I mustn't forget the driver. There's two of us on a double-decker bus. And there have been other times when I haven't been allowed to access the bus because they put on a minibus and it's full up. So I think things get quite, you know, if you're going north, west, or south, you've got the choice between a bus or a train. I'm not saying it's ideal, and we heard earlier that it's not, but going west, there's only a bus, and the service is really quite shoddy. There are some drivers in particular, and it's down to the individual, who are exceptionally sympathetic, helpful, and supportive. And I wrote to the bus company about one such. I thought, well, let's shine a light on the good stuff. But when I asked him a year later, did you by any chance get someone to the office? They said that they were going to congratulate you. No action had been taken. So that was quite disappointing. And that's also characterized their responses to my less than positive letters as well. The other aspect that I wanted to touch on is active travel, but I think I've probably said too much at this juncture, so I'll shut up now. But I definitely wanted to speak about active travel if possible.
You certainly will. Linda, can we have your perspective, and then we'll move to Rachel's question and Jack's introduction.
Yep, thanks, Suzanne. I mean, from a Max perspective, one of the things that we produced and we've been promoting for a few years now is the AAA check for transport, and that's as relevant to public transport as it is to active travel. It's about making sure that transport's available, it's accessible and it's affordable. And we find that in most occasions, transport doesn't pass the 3 checks. And if it doesn't pass the 3 checks, either one of them can break the journey down for the person. So it's really just about promoting that. The availability, we know bus services, particularly in rural areas, have been withdrawn, or they're putting coaches in bus routes that aren't suitable for people with poor mobility. And I think it's about really that, not just the availability, but if it's not there, you can't use it, but it's the accessibility that Ian picked up on there, and there's also the affordability element. Another thing is for instance, if you look at the concessionary travel scheme, with the concessionary travel scheme, if you live in a rural area and you don't have a bus service, you're excluded from benefiting or excluded from using the concessionary travel scheme that people in rural areas don't think twice about using in the local bus service. So there's an exclusion there. And if you put that AAA check onto it, again, it flags things up. But for us, it's about the whole journey. It's the door to door. It's the getting to the bus stop. It's how do you get to the bus stop, that first and last mile, and then the intermodal connections. These are the parts, particularly with active travel, when we're looking at statistics, that are never picked up. The bits that's the walking and wheeling, the home to the bus stop, the bus to the train, the intermodal bits, there's very, very limited data on that. And if we take that forward a bit and we try to understand the travel behaviours of disabled people, it's even hard to get good data on that. This year's Transport Scotland produced a report from the Scottish Household Survey called Disability in Transport, and it gives a bit more information on it, but we still really need to understand the travel behaviours, but we need to understand the needs as well. What we find is transport's built around the needs and the timetables and the budgets of the transport operators, and in some occasions of the profit margins, and it really needs to be built around what people need. No, there's some people can't access public transport at the times that they need to, or for the journeys that they need to, or for the full journey. And a lot of times that means they default to car ownership and to using a car. Whereas if we really designed the transport system around community needs, around people's needs, we would get more people enabled to use public transport, rather than as it is just now, it's designed around the needs of the transport provider. So we really need a shift there.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. And I think kind of it's very easy to lose that people-centered approach, isn't it? So we always need to kind of come back to that in all these conversations, whatever the specific topic. Jack, are you there?
I think so. Can
you hear me? You're there. We're in. Brilliant. Jack, before I ask you my first question for you, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I've spent the last 10 years from an operator point of view. So I've worked for Deutsche Bahn and Arriva, developing different products to try and encourage more people to use the traditional bus. And then I helped to launch Arriva's demand responsive transport service, Arriva Click. So I launched that in a few different places in England. And I then joined a startup called Zelo, who developed sort of an interurban demand responsive coach service for schools, for businesses, to try and encourage people to get out of the car and use a coach to get to work. So like commuter coaching, school coaches. And then relatively recently, I launched some public bike share schemes in Dundee and Leicester. And now I'm sort of doing full circle back into demand responsive transport with Padam. So I'm working with Padam to launch them across the UK. They are a Siemens business who have developed a platform that combines the door-to-door needs of dial-a-ride and community transport with the sort of corner-to-corner demand responsive transport that you may see with Via Van and some others across the globe. So they're working at combining what they would call paratransit with the sort of dynamic DRT to have a blended approach, so that the people that are able to walk to the corner can walk to the corner, and the people that need the bus to come to their door are able to book it as well. So I've worked on various different projects, and I'm really just here to sort of learn more about the actual needs of people, and how we can start to continually tailor and develop products, so that ideally we can just get people out of the car. That's the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree with that kind of end goal. And I think, you know, we've spoken about the number of modes that can be involved in that move away from the sort of private car as default option. You'll have heard from Ian and Linda, and earlier in the day, the situation is pretty dire. There's, you know, but we do see pockets of light in that. We see really exciting schemes, be that shared transport, community transport, where things are running in different ways. But they are pockets. There is nowhere near the critical mass that we need. Do you have experience potentially from other countries where that critical mass has been achieved? Where, and when I say mass, I mean MASS, not MAAS, you know what I mean? But are there examples that we can take inspiration from where it's not pockets of light, but it's, you know, the full thing is illuminated?
Yeah, and it really originates from policymakers being brave, I suppose, and not just targeting budgets, but looking at things holistically. So in France, where Padam are quite strong, we have 50 DRT operations across France. So it's probably double the amount of dynamic dialer rides in the UK at the moment, just what Padam run. And they are very much focused on very rural locations, in areas that either used to have a bus or the bus service was quite poor. And they've been working with local provinces and regions to really sort of say, okay, at the moment there's 2 bus routes in this 100 square kilometre area. It's only serving 10% of the population. We could reutilize those buses in a slightly different way. It would mean that maybe we stop the bookings 2 hours beforehand, but the whole region holistically has a level of service. And it's just about really pinpointing where people need to travel to, not allowing complete free-floated sort of travel across huge regions, but feeding into interurban buses or feeding into the centre of a town, having many origins to single destinations, and so kind of not allowing the technology to just do too much, because then it can't cope with the demand, but really focusing on specific points, and tailoring certain vehicles to just do those basic things, at least gives people a level of service. It might not be the most amazing thing ever. It's not a taxi, you can't go anywhere, but at least it covers the basic needs of going to a train station, going to an interurban bus, going to a hospital, going to a town centre. And actually that's what the majority of people are looking for with a service.
Yeah, no, that's great, thank you. Suzanne, I'll come back over to you.
Yes, thanks, Jack. That's really interesting. Linda, just back to you now to talk a little bit about something slightly different. I think those of us who are involved in cycling, see a lot of backlash in urban areas, but in others, against cycling infrastructure, because a lot of people that drive are saying, well, disabled people are completely disadvantaged by the increase in cycling infrastructure. Disabled people and perhaps older people can't cycle. And I did notice in the chat there are a couple of people suggesting that cycling wasn't for everyone, and that's true, not everyone can cycle. But did you have any comments about accessibility of cycling, or how many disabled people do want to try cycling, and your thoughts perhaps about bike share and how that could better serve the needs of disabled people?
I think there's a couple of things there. Again, it goes back to it's back to engagement when you're designing and speaking to people about what you're designing. We know some of the stuff that come up for the Spaces for People initiatives have really put in challenges for disabled people, things like floating bus stops, removing blue badge spaces. As you know, we've been pushing for segregated cycle paths, just to take that tension away between people that are walking or wheeling and people that are cycling. It was, I think during the lockdowns that tension raised a bit because more people were staying close to home and using an already poor infrastructure. And as it was getting overcrowded, there was more tensions coming up about cycles being off the road and on the pavements, or about these shared paths. So I would say, no, in terms of those tensions, it's about where we can to have segregated routes, and just that acknowledgement that if you don't plan it right and you don't involve all the groups, but particularly from my point of view, disabled people, you do end up with things like floating bus stops, which are just dangerous for disabled people trying to board and get off buses. You do end up with things like taking away blue badge spaces to put in cycling infrastructure, which means that disabled people can't get back close enough to their destination. So there's these things that all come into conflict. But while I've got you and while I've got the mic on this one, a couple of my other bugbears, and I do know that cycling isn't for everyone, and I do understand that, and I think that's why we really have to be pushing for the EEE check and public transport as well. No, that public transport needs to be fit for purpose, and fit for purpose is fit for people's purpose, for what they want to use it for and when they want to use it. But on the active travel or the cycling part, my bugbear is every time I see a new bike hire scheme going in, whether it's in rural areas or whether it's in the urban areas, they all go in without any adapted bikes or non-standard bikes in it. And if we know that between 20 and 30% of the population are disabled, then 1 in 5 of them should offer an option. 1 in 5 of them should maybe be a trike or should be a tandem. But just think about it. Next time you walk by one of the bike hire racks and you look at the bikes that are sitting in that, you'll maybe see 10, 20 bikes. You won't see any that offer an option for disabled people to use to get a bit more active. I stay in the Falkirk area, and I often see people frustrated at the Falkirk Wheel and the Helix. There's a fantastic infrastructure between both. It's great for walking and wheeling or for cycling, and they've got bike hire schemes at both ends of that, both at the Helix Park and at the Falkirk Wheel. But all they ever puts in standard bike hire and standard e-bikes. So you see people sitting in their car with a wee cup of tea, and my heart really goes out to them because they just need some assistance. And if we're talking about 1 in 5 of the population identifying as disabled, then we really need to be thinking of every time we put in one of the bike racks with 5 bikes, one should offer an option for disabled people. If we don't, it's exclusion and discrimination.
Thank you, Linda. Ian, do you want to have 60 seconds to talk about your trike before we move on?
Well, I'm one of the rare disabled people who's been a beneficiary of that kind of intervention, and it's really changed my life. So my perspective has been enhanced no end. I maybe got slightly rosy spectacles as a result. I hope, Linda, that you don't think I'm contradicting you at all. I just want to make the point that if we ask the question, do we need more or less active travel infrastructure? I think the answer is, as a disabled person, unequivocally more. We definitely do. In fact, I'm participating in an event called Critical Mass this weekend. And I've been asked as a disabled rider on my trike to lead the event where there's several hundred kids. I feel like the Pied Piper. But we're all campaigning for space for the next generation. That's the slogan for the initiative. It's a global initiative. So yeah, I realize there's a lot of issues that need dealt with regard to the accessibility of these things for disabled people. But once those wishes are dignified or granted, it has improved my mental health no end, as well as my physical health from the MS point of view. I think I've probably said enough.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I've got a whole article about you, so I can post that up. Sorry, Linda, go on.
No, I was just going to ask if we could jump back in quickly. I don't disagree with Ian, but I think we have to understand when we talk about active travel, it's not just cycling, walking's active travel, wheeling's
Yeah.
active travel. So we need to have that infrastructure removes the tension between cyclists and walkers and wheelers. Well, if we look at the sustainable travel hierarchy, we know that we've got walking and wheeling at the top, and then cycling, and then down to mass transits like bus. No, and I think it's getting the mind shift. We spoke earlier on about behavioural change. It's getting the mind shift away that active travel isn't cycling. Active travel is everything that's non-motorised. No, so that's walking and wheeling. And there's far more walkers and wheelers than there are cyclists. But so we need good infrastructure that manages both, good infrastructure that's capable of both. There's some of the policies that are out there just now that I wholly support, round about the 20-minute neighbourhood aspirations, connected communities, the green agenda, reducing road kilometres, reducing journey commute times, improving road safety. We need to do all this, but unless we take account of everybody's needs, we won't get it right. And we need to know that active travel is walking, wheeling and cycling.
Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. Just to say that on the event on Saturday will include wheelchair users and walkers as well. So yeah, absolutely, 100%.
And I suppose, and I'm sure those living in rural community and villages will agree with me that their pavements are crap, as they are in urban areas. No, we really need to focus on get pavements right.
I just want to jump in and I just want to jump in and say, I think we're at risk of the sort of the top couple of bits of the priority triangle getting in conflict with each other, where actually there's so much, isn't there, about, you think about a major road, how much is given over to private cars versus cyclists, walkers and wheelers, and we're kind of fighting for scraps, where actually, exactly to say, Linda, we are at the top of that pyramid. And I think we need to find those ways that we can work together. I think you mentioned about sort of a separate space for walkers and wheelers and for cyclists is so important, because then we're actually saying both of these are incredibly valid and they need their own space and less focus on, the private car. Of course, lots of us have a need, particularly around mobility needs, for a private car, but there are so many journeys, that don't need to be done in that way. And can we give that space over to prioritise walkers, wheelers and cyclists? And Suzanne's nodding furiously, so I'll take that as a good sign. I had a question about, one thing Jenny has asked me in the chat to remind folks to fill in the poll. It's great having SRITC cafes, but we'd love to see more of you at them. So please do respond to the poll just to say when works for you. And if it's that multiple times work, then I'm sure if you drop Alex a wee message, he will record your answer. I think the next thing I have on my list to mention is concessionary travel. Linda, you already mentioned the issues around affordability in rural areas. Folks have mentioned the difficulties of particularly longer journeys. Does anybody want to come in on that topic of how do we make concessionary work for rural? Linda, you were kind of last talking about concessionary, so do you maybe want to jump in?
Yeah, happy to start that discussion. And it's something, again, that Max have been pushing for some time. We feel there's a need to explore concessionary travel. Most of the conditions that are in there have been in for about 40 years and not reviewed, as different modes of transport and different ways of getting about have changed. We were quite hopeful when we seen the Scottish Government and the Scottish Green Party cooperation agreement, the partnership agreement, and under the section on transport, it talks about a fair fares review. That's not just fair fares, it's fair fares review, because that gives us an in into that. It needs to be reviewed. There's inequalities there. When we do engagements in rural areas, mainly in rural areas, although we do hear it in some urban areas as well, depending on bus routes. But when we do engagements in rural areas, we always hear about not being able to use the bus pass. So what's the point of making a bus pass? I can't use it. There's no service. It doesn't run at the time I need, blah, blah, blah. And you know yourself, Rachel, they turn to community transport, but most of the community transport schemes, they can't get concessionary travel on that. And that brings it into the travel poverty area as well. They can't afford to travel because they can't pay 36p a mile, particularly in rural areas, where the distances are longer. I'm saying 36p a mile, I might be getting mixed up with the price that they used to pay per mile in the old car service, so excuse that one. But still, the distance that they have to reimburse for fuel costs is too high for them to make that journey. Look, what we hear happens is people then become socially isolated and lonely, and there's these other, it just leads to a whole other health and well-being issues. So really we need to look and say, is the concessionary travel scheme still fit for purpose? But the big thing is it doing what it's set out to do? And I would suggest in rural areas, no, it's not. No, it's supposed to give people that need it concessionary travel, and we know in rural areas there's whole communities that aren't getting the benefit for that Scottish Government flagship scheme. So for me, yeah, I would say there needs to be a review of the concessionary travel scheme to see where these exclusions are, see where people getting excluded for the scheme, and see what can be done to make the scheme fit this day and age when we have things like DRT and mass, and allow them to use concessions in that where there's not a public transport service, or where the route that they can get for other things suits them better.
You have led me so beautifully into my next question, which is, Jack, how does concessionary travel work with DRT, and with these new and emerging modes? Do you feel that the system we have in Scotland is fit for purpose?
So yeah, with concessionary travel and DRT, if it's registered as a flexible bus service, which some of the sort of larger operators register their services as a public bus rather than community transport, concessionary cards are valid, but it's between the operator and the local authority to deem what either discount or so for example, you could have a situation where short journeys that feed into interurban buses, for example, so if it's a feeder, the local authority could say that service, as it's under 5 miles or 4 miles, can be done free of charge with a concessionary card. But if a journey is going to travel for 45 minutes to an hour and it's an almost door-to-door service, then potentially that journey could be eligible for 50% off. So as a company, we're starting to add into our product roadmap the ability to do lots of sort of neat things with the concessionary card back end, so that the system talks to the concessionary card database, and then there's a log of who's travelled for free, who's travelled for a discount, and then the operators can then negotiate on a yearly basis with the local authority on their reimbursements. But I think we need to probably go a step further than that. If mobility as a service is to be for all, then there needs to be a sort of restructure of the policy, I would say, and there needs to have the ability for a mass platform to be able to know if the user has a concessionary card, and then for them to display not just bus, but any other of the modes, maybe car share, maybe if someone's traveling in a similar direction, and have the ability for that journey to also have a level of discount based on your concessions card, because it's only through doing that all the different transport modes are going to be open to young people, older people that have a disability. So I think the technology is starting to allow for mass platforms, and we're seeing them more in mainland Europe, but it's not going to be open to all unless they factor in policy change as well.
Well, thank you so much.
So I go for the last question. We've got to wrap up. I'm afraid we're already out of time. So 30 seconds from everyone. What are the quick wins here? What is the one quick win that will transform your mobility? Ian first, quickly.
Sorry, took me 10 seconds to unmute. I beg your pardon. Well, buses at appropriate times. There's been no dialogue with the community as to how the community can be served. For example, there's no bus from Inverness after hours at all. So, you know, that would be a good thing, would allow me to go out with friends or in town or go to Eden Court or something like that. Active travel.
That's 30 seconds. Sorry, Ian.
Yeah.
Sorry, we'll get shouted at by Jenny.
Okay.
Linda.
I'm going to do my best to stick to 30 seconds and Ian's covered the bus for me.
Yeah.
Pavements. We did a session, a webinars on 20-minute neighbourhoods, and the thing that kept coming up was pavements, pavement infrastructure maintenance, drop curbs, crossing points, get cars off of pavements, get cyclists off of pavements, clear them for people.
You've done this before, haven't you, Linda? That was a very impressive list. Fabulous. Jack, any last comments, quick wins that you see from all this time working on these issues?
Yeah, I would just say that we need a way of scoring transport infrastructure based on its impact versus the car, and that should be the main aim. Is any investment, what is the damage that cars are doing? It's air quality, it's pollution, it's destructing people's lives through congestion, and every single transport mode that is being funded, it should be about getting as many people out of the car as possible.
Well, Suzanne, do you want to drop in your 30 seconds?
Oh, free bikes for everyone.
Oh, that was easy. Good. That was 10 seconds. I will just finish up the session by saying, folks, thank you for bearing with us. Do recognise it's the last one of the day. When we were planning this event, Linda said something that really struck me, which is we end up in a situation if there's tension between disabled advocacy, cycling advocacy, and how do we deal with the fact that so often we're pitted against each other? How do we deal with the fact that different modes are pitted against each other, different regions fighting for funding, dare I say it, even different third sector organisations fighting for funding? So my leaving thought with you for this session is, how do we break out of our silos and not pit ourselves against each other, but work together? And I would highly recommend attending SRITC events as a key part of becoming part of a bigger transport whole. And with that, I'll hand back over to Jenny.
Thank you, Rachel and team, and Suzanne and team. Am I that scary, really, that you're going to do everything? And I have to say, Linda, you probably talk quicker than I do, which is pretty impressive, because I get ticked off for talking too quickly, so well done. I know Alex has put another poll up. We do have to evidence gather at the moment, so please do take the time to fill in. And if you do put down it's not very useful or it was useless, please tell us. Please actually email me and tell me why, because that's the only way that we learn, and that's what evidence building is about. Equally, if you found it really useful, tell us what you found useful, because then we can embrace that and take that forward. Going forward, we do have the October Cafe, and we do have, which is open to all, and it is just a free-for-all if you've not been to one before. It's bring your own cake, tea, coffee, and we will have a chat for 40 minutes, 45 minutes about whatever is bothering you, bugging you, you want to find a solution for. And then in November, I'm going to land Suzanne on this, but I think we'll probably try and continue this chat about cycling and active travel and accessibility. May well be the cafe in November. So yes, I could share a slide with you, and I probably should share one, but I will be emailing you out. So if you don't get an email because it lands in spam, let me know. But the emails that you need to not have going into your spam, if you want to know more about what's going on, is the jenny@jennymilne.com email, and I can put these in the chat in a minute. And then we have created the ruralmobility.scot website, so that will be Alex at and Jenny at, because we are going into spam and people aren't getting the information, which really is a bummer, because we want to be able to make sure everybody is informed and facilitate. So sorry to bark on about that. I have to say my big thank yous. This has been a very great day, and Johanna can report that there is no bomb in her area. I know she put it in the chat earlier on. It is a false alarm. She is safe, so that's good. But we do have the social if you want to do something in the evening. As I said, just message and we will help facilitate that. It's been phenomenal the last 18 months, I have to say, going from, and we were planning online before we ended up with a COVID pandemic, but it's fantastic how everybody's embraced it, and we try and do things differently here at SRITC, as you can see. So wandering around and doing scavenger hunts is part of the norm here, as is eating cake, as is taking a cafe or part of the gathering on a podcast and walking, because it's not about sitting there, it's about engaging and being inspiring. So I hope that's what you found today. Next year it will be in person, and I will be rather under the influence maybe one night before when I actually get to see people in person and give them hugs and get chats and things. But I do want to say a big thanks to Alex, who's behind the scenes here. Alex, put your video on, please. Put a face to your name wherever you are. Yeah. Well done. Alex is very much supporting me, and we have had many late nights trying to pull all this together. I have to thank all the speakers, the supporters, and thankfully Zoom, because yesterday nothing would share and I was panicking for the first time ever that my PowerPoint wasn't going to share. So thank you. Fill in the last 6 people, please, the overall gathering feedback. Alex, have I missed anything? You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute, Jenny. No, thank you. I mean, again, a big thanks to Jenny on behalf of everyone, because again, it was Jenny that began all this back in 2018, and we've come a long way in a short space of time. And I think today's evidence of the enthusiasm that so many people have got for SRITC. So very much thank everyone again for turning up. And I think on behalf of Jenny and myself, really hope to see you face to face at some point in the near future, because we've been starved of that for too long. So yeah, definitely 2022 is when we start to get together in person and have a 2022 gathering that is a lot more than just staring at a screen. Even though, and
if you want to stare at a screen on a Wednesday morning, remember we will be in the Scottish Parliament, and I will be very nervous about doing this. Yes, Rachel, it may be exciting, but it's absolutely excruciatingly nerve-wracking. So we've only just got the briefing paper through. So final call for evidence, email me, put it in the chat. We want to make sure that our voices are all heard in the Parliament next week. So I think we need to be proud that we've achieved that. So thank you all again, and have a good evening. And if you want to meet up with other people, just message us. And I'm hoping Janice got my message and she might hold on until the end, but I'll let all of you disappear except for my musketeers and Janice, if that's possible. Thanks, folks. Bye.